Dad fell in love with my aunt right after Mom's funeral. But when he tried to erase her memory and kick me out of my own house, he forgot one thing. Mom had left behind a secret that changed everything and turned the tables forever. Welcome to Storytime Reddit, everyone. I'm 17 years old, and I think I've aged twice that in just 1 year. My mom passed away less than a year ago after many long years of fighting cancer. She was the strongest woman I've ever known, someone who, even as her body grew weaker from constant chemotherapy, would still hold my hand, smile, and say, "I'm okay, sweetheart." But she wasn't okay. And now, I'm not okay either. I've been living with my dad since she died. We used to be a family of 3 small, but full of laughter and love. When I was a kid, I genuinely thought I had won the jackpot just being born into a warm, caring home. But then, Mom got sick. I remember the day she was diagnosed with cancer like it was burned into my memory. I was only 13. From that moment on, hospitals became our second home. Dad was the sole breadwinner, and I, a teenage boy, became Mom's primary caregiver. I fed her, helped her to the bathroom, read to her every night, and sometimes just sat beside her in silence so she'd know she wasn't alone. I never saw it as a burden. I loved her. I would do it all over again, no complaints, just to see her smile one more time. But there's something I can't seem to shake, the feeling that I was slowly losing my father throughout that entire time. At first, he was caring and attentive too, but as Mom's condition worsened, he started to change. He became snappy, distant, and buried himself in work. I tried to understand. I thought maybe he was just stressed, but as time passed, that excuse no longer held up. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. It felt like he was just waiting for her to die. When Mom finally passed, I thought at the very least we'd grieve together, that we'd share quiet dinners filled with memories, that we'd sit in silence and feel the same ache. But that didn't happen. Just a few weeks after the funeral, my dad took down every photo of her, packed away all her belongings as if she'd never existed. I held onto the boxes that I could, her handkerchiefs, a few old photos, the books she was halfway through. I kept them in my room. And every night before I went to bed, I'd quietly tell her about my day, what I ate, how school went, and how much I missed her. People say time heals, but how can it when the wound is ripped open again and again each day, especially when the only person left, my father, acts as if she was never even here? Every morning I step out of my room, the house feels colder than the day before. Not because it's empty, but because the one left behind no longer carries any warmth. My dad barely talks to me. In fact, he barely even looks at me. I used to believe that no matter what happened, even after losing Mom, my dad and I would lean on each other. But now, I feel like a stranger living in the house I grew up in. And for the first time, I started to feel afraid, not of death, but of being abandoned by the only family I had left. I don't know what I did wrong, but what I do know is that I feel completely alone. And if my mom were still here, she would never let me feel this way. I thought I had already endured enough pain. My mom passed away, my dad grew distant, our family fell apart. But no, the worst was still waiting for me. Just a few weeks after Mom's funeral, my dad told me something I could never have imagined. He was dating Aunt Edna, my mom's biological sister. I remember that night vividly. I was sitting in my room when Dad knocked on the door and said he wanted to talk. I thought, finally, he wants to reconnect, maybe we'd grieve together like father and son. But no, his voice was calm, disturbingly calm. "Edna and we're seeing each other, I hope you understand." I froze, my mind spun, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man who had buried his wife barely 2 months ago was now dating her own sister? I completely lost it. I screamed at him. "You're disgusting, don't you see how sick this is? Mom just died?" He just sighed. No reaction, no anger, no apology. He simply said, "I know you don't understand now, but when you're older, you will." Understand what? That it's okay to betray someone who stood beside you for 20 years? That it's somehow reasonable to erase all memory of your wife and run into the arms of her sister? I couldn't accept it. I felt betrayed in every way possible. Not just by the father I once respected, but also by Aunt Edna, the woman who used to help care for Mom when she was bedridden. The same woman who once told me, "Your mom is the strongest woman I've ever known." What a lie. After that fight, I stopped speaking to Dad altogether. He carried on as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, I lived inside my small room, buried in the memories of my mother and growing more isolated with each passing day. Then Aunt Edna started coming over more often. Then she stayed longer. And slowly she became part of the house. People say time heals all wounds, but for me, the wound just kept bleeding. One day, Aunt Edna knocked on my door. I didn't want to open it, but she wouldn't stop knocking. Finally, I opened it, my eyes cold and expressionless. She smiled faintly. "I just want to talk," she said. "I'm not trying to replace your mom. I just want to help this family move forward. We're still family after all." I laughed a bitter, hollow laugh. "Family? You call stealing your sister's husband helping?" She tried to say something else, but I wasn't listening. I shut the door in her face. People might think I was being dramatic, that I should learn to accept and move on. But this wasn't some breakup. This wasn't some old relationship I needed to get over. This was my mother, the woman who gave me life, loved me, and died calling my name in pain. And now, the man who used to hold her every night was sleeping with her sister. People around me started looking at me like I was the irrational one, the stubborn son who refused to move on. But no one understood every time I saw Dad and Aunt Edna together, it felt like someone stabbed Mom all over again. I couldn't forgive. I couldn't forget. So I built myself a shell. A room of my own, a world of my own, just me and Mom's memories. Old photos, her books, the scarf she knitted but never finished, that was my sanctuary. As for the rest of the world, I stopped trusting anyone. And I came to understand something I wish I never had to learn. Sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who betray you in the cruelest ways. I didn't think things could get any worse after finding out that my dad was dating my mom's biological sister. But as it turns out, pain has no limit. One morning, I woke up to the sound of clattering downstairs. I opened my bedroom door, looked down the staircase, and froze. Aunt Edna was moving in. Actually moving in, with suitcases, boxes, and a guilty look in her eyes like she knew she didn't belong. No warning. No asking if I was okay. Not even a single word to ask how I felt about her moving into the house that used to be my mother's sanctuary. I rushed down the stairs, stood in front of her, and demanded, "What's going on here?" She didn't respond, just gave me a quick glance and walked right upstairs straight into my mom's bedroom. The room still smelled like Mom's perfume. Her old books sat on the nightstand. The wedding photo was still on the wall. My throat tightened instantly. I turned to my dad, demanding an explanation. But all he did was smirk and say, "Oh, so now you want to talk to me?" I used to love my dad, I really did. I believed he was the one person I could still rely on after everything. But in that moment, when I looked into his cold, detached eyes, I realized I no longer had a family. From that day forward, the house stopped being a home. It became a battlefield. I didn't talk to anyone. I kept my door locked at all times, only stepping out to eat or go to school. The rest of my days were spent hiding in the shell I built for myself just to avoid seeing the perfect couple downstairs. I began moving all of Mom's belongings into my room, her clothes, photo albums, books, and little trinkets she once loved. There was no way I'd let Aunt Edna get her hands on them. I knew she'd toss them the moment she got the chance, just like how Dad ripped every picture of Mom off the walls without a second thought. I locked my room every time I left. And just as I expected, Aunt Edna tried to get in several times. She made up excuses like looking for something or cleaning, and even asked my dad directly, "Where are your wife's things kept now?" His answer? "In the boys' room. He's keeping all of it." I knew she was waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to slip, so she could erase every trace of her own sister, the woman whose husband she had taken. And then came the final straw. 2 weeks later, Rachel, Aunt Edna's daughter, moved in. I used to like Rachel. We were like siblings when we were little. But time and distance had cooled whatever bond we had. Still, when I saw her walking through the front door, a tiny part of me hoped maybe she'd understand. Maybe I wouldn't feel so alone anymore. But no. Dad called me downstairs, standing next to Rachel, and coldly said, "There's not enough space in this house for 4 people. You'll need to stay with a friend for a few days while we sort things out." As long as I stayed here, no one would touch those memories. No one had the right to erase my mom just because they wanted to start over. And if that made me the rebellious one, the ungrateful child, the difficult son in everyone's eyes, so be it. Because some kinds of love don't require forgiveness. And some wounds aren't meant to be forgotten. I thought everyone had turned their backs on me. That I was the only one in this house who still remembered Mom, who still cherished the loss she left behind. But then Rachel showed up and brought with her a small glimmer of hope. I used to think Rachel was just like her mother, same blood, same cold way of looking at the world. We were close when we were kids, but we had drifted apart for years, so when she moved into this house, I thought, great, one more person on their side. But then, on a night when I could barely sleep, afraid Aunt Edna would try to sneak into my room, I heard a soft knock on the door. I didn't answer, but the knocking didn't stop, and then a voice said, "It's me, Rachel. You don't need to open the door. I just wanted to give you this." A folded piece of paper slid gently under the door. I stared at it lying there on the floor like a message from another world. It took me a few minutes to even pick it up. It was a short note. "Call Grandpa, right away. He's been waiting to hear from you, and you need to know the truth." I didn't know if I could trust Rachel. After all, she was still Aunt Edna's daughter. But at that point, I had nothing left to lose. And honestly, I was just too tired of enduring everything alone. I called my grandfather, my mom's father. The call started with tears. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember his voice being calm, like he had been waiting for me to reach out. He didn't ask much. He just quietly listened as I told him about the isolation, about my dad kicking me out of the house, about how I had to guard every piece of Mom's belongings like treasure. And then he said, "You don't know this, but the house you're living in belongs to you. Your mom planned everything before she passed, and I won't let anyone take it from you." I went numb. He went on to explain. When Rachel and I were little, he bought 2 houses, one for each of us, out of love for his grandchildren. Since we were both underage, the properties were placed under the guardianship of our mothers. Rachel's house had already been transferred to her name last year when she turned 18. As for mine, the house I was living in, it had always been meant for me. But because my mom passed away before I turned 18, temporary guardianship was supposed to go to my father. However, and this was the important part, my mom had seen all of this coming. In her final days, she secretly changed the paperwork and assigned guardianship to my grandfather. And my dad had no idea. Suddenly, everything made sense. Why Dad and Aunt Edna kept trying to go through Mom's things. Why they were pushing so hard to get me out of the house. Why Rachel, who I thought had grown distant, had returned and handed me that note. Rachel knew the truth. And she had chosen to stand by me. Grandpa told me to keep everything quiet, not to say a word to anyone. He was flying out in a few days to meet me, and he promised he would take care of everything. After I hung up the phone, I just sat there in the dark. I didn't know if it was a dream or real. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I didn't know what Grandpa was going to do. I didn't know what I would have to face. But I did know one thing for sure. Justice was coming for my mom, for me, and for everything they tried to bury. I never imagined there would come a day when my grandfather, the kindest man in our entire family, would walk into my house like a storm and turn everything upside down. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon. It was lightly raining, the air was damp and cold, like nature itself was signaling that a storm was coming, and it truly was. When the front door swung open, there he was, standing calmly with his old leather briefcase in one hand, and behind him, a man in glasses holding a stack of documents. My dad froze the moment he saw him, his face turning pale. Aunt Edna was stammering, unable to form a single word. They had no idea he was coming. "Hello," Grandpa said, his voice calm but ringing out like a bell signaling the end. "I'm here to reclaim what belongs to my grandson." My dad forced a nervous laugh, trying to maintain his usual air of control. "Dad, this is a family matter. You don't need." "No," Grandpa cut him off, turning toward the man beside him. "This is my lawyer, and these are the legal documents proving this house belongs to my grandson. And ever since his mother passed, I've been his legal guardian until he turns 18. The room fell into a heavy silence. My dad snatched the folder, flipping through the pages, his eyes widening in disbelief. "This is fake. Mary couldn't have changed the guardianship without me knowing." "Because she didn't tell you," Grandpa replied, his eyes cold. "She saw it all coming, including you bringing Edna into this house and trying to take over what belongs to her son." Aunt Edna trembled, and my dad's face turned beet red with anger. But at this point, no one cared. Grandpa had taken control. He announced that they had 1 month to vacate the property, the house that had legally belonged to me since I was a child. Either leave peacefully or let the courts handle it, he said, showing no hesitation. I stood silently in the back, barely able to process what was happening. Suddenly, I had a voice in my own home again. No longer the unwanted burden. I was the rightful heir, my mother's son, the only person she had trusted with everything until her last breath. And then something even more surprising happened. Rachel stepped out from the kitchen and stood beside me. When my dad and Aunt Edna realized she had secretly helped me contact Grandpa, their faces turned to stone. Aunt Edna screamed, "You betrayed your own mother? How dare you?" And then she slapped Rachel. Hard. The slap echoed through the house, chilling. But Rachel didn't cry. She simply turned her face, wiped the blood from her lip, and smiled. I'm pressing charges for assault, and if necessary, for emotional abuse over the past decade. Aunt Edna collapsed to the floor, sobbing. My dad was speechless, stunned. The masks had finally come off. I looked at Rachel, then walked over and hugged her. Through tears, I whispered, "If it weren't for you, I don't know where I'd be right now." Grandpa turned to me and gently said, "From now on, everything will be okay. You don't have to fight this alone anymore." And for the first time in so many months, I actually believed it. I used to think that if I ever had the choice, I would avoid my father forever. But life always knows how to push us to the edge and then force us to face it. After my grandfather and his lawyer came to the house and made the decision to clean up everything tied to my father and Aunt Edna's plan to steal my inheritance, the air in the house became heavy, almost like you could slice it with a knife. Everything was scarily silent. No one argued anymore, and no one pretended to be kind. Only the truth, raw and bitter, was laid out for everyone to see. I thought it would end there. I thought my dad would quietly move out and pretend he never had a son named me. But no. He tried to hold on. He tried to make things right. But it was too late. One evening, while I was sitting in my room, the door swung open. No knock, no warning. It was him, my father, the man who had once coldly declared he would give me a week to get out. Now he stood there, his back slightly hunched, hair messy, his eyes not angry, but oddly fragile. "Son," he began. I turned away, refusing to answer. "I just want to talk." I stayed silent for a moment, then coldly replied, "To the person you kicked out? The ungrateful kid? Or the son you said you didn't want anymore?" He lowered his head. I know, I was wrong. And suddenly, I don't know why, but every emotion inside me burst out. I stood up and screamed, as if all the pain and resentment I had bottled up for months had finally broken loose. Wrong? One word is supposed to fix all of this? You betrayed Mom. You brought another woman, her own sister, into our home, into her bedroom, and tried to erase every memory of her from this place. You think I didn't see it? You think I didn't notice how you looked away from Mom's pictures because they made you uncomfortable, not because you felt guilty? He stood there silently. I continued, my voice shaking but steady. Do you even know what I've been living like? Every day I locked my room because I was scared Mom would be erased again. Every night I held her belongings and trembled, afraid they would vanish by morning. And where were you? With your new woman? Sleeping in Mom's bed with someone who used to call her sister? By then, Grandpa and Rachel were standing outside the door. They didn't step in. They let me say it all. They let me release everything. I looked at my dad one last time. No longer angry, just hollow. Like the sadness that settles after the fire has already burned everything to the ground. I don't need your apology. I don't need your explanation. Because I'm not your son anymore. The man I once called my father died with my mother. I turned away. Grandpa gently placed a hand on my shoulder, as if silently saying, "You did the right thing." My dad stood there a little longer, then turned, walked toward the stairs, and left through the front door, more defeated than I had ever seen him. That night, Rachel sat quietly beside me in my room. She handed me a cup of tea. She didn't say anything. She just stayed with me. We both knew a new chapter had begun. No father. No Edna. Only the people who truly honored the memory and sacrifice of my mother. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing for sure. I said what needed to be said. I protected my mom, and I finally found myself again. Everything eventually began to quiet down. There was no tearful reconciliation, no emotional hug between father and son, no late apologies or dreams of a mended family. Only the truth and one firm decision to close the old chapter and step into a new one. After that final confrontation, my father stopped trying to talk to me. Maybe he finally realized that things had gone past the point of no return. He and Aunt Edna had exactly 1 month to leave the house. They packed in silence, avoiding both me and Grandpa as if we were stains they couldn't wash away. And me, I started putting the house back together. I took each of Mom's belongings from my room, cleaned them gently, and returned them to their original spots: the wedding photo on the table, her old notebook on the bookshelf, the apron she used to wear in the kitchen. Every time I touched one of them, I could hear her voice in my head. "Be careful, sweetheart, you're going to tear the cover off my notebook." I smiled. For the first time in months, that smile didn't come with tears. I decided to lock her room. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to preserve. Mom would always be a part of this house. No one had the right to replace her. Grandpa moved in with me. Now it was just the two of us and a quiet, warm kind of peace. He wakes up early, brews tea, reads the paper, and tells the driest jokes that somehow still feel full of love. Every night he asks me, "You doing okay today, kiddo?" Sometimes I nod firmly. Sometimes just a little. But he always understands. I also started opening up more to Rachel. Even after the years we spent apart, I realized she had never really left me. She came by every day, bringing food, schoolwork, bad jokes, and even advice that sometimes annoyed me, but also reminded me that someone truly cared. One day, when she saw me pacing around the house with no purpose, she grabbed my hand and pulled me outside. "Come on, let's go get ice cream, and on the way, you're going to tell me about your first crush. If you don't, I'll go first." I laughed. I thought I had lost everything. But it turns out, I still had a family, just in a different form. Not perfect, not complete, but genuine and stronger than anything I'd known before. I knew I needed time. I had lost my mother. I had lost the image of the father I once trusted. I had even lost faith in the idea of what a home was supposed to be. Those wounds don't heal overnight. But I was learning how to heal slowly, piece by piece. I started thinking about seeing a therapist. At first, I hesitated. But Rachel helped me find a place that felt right. She told me, "What you went through wasn't small. You deserve help. You don't have to carry this like an adult when you've been doing it since you were 13. She was right. I didn't want to be the strong one anymore. I just wanted to be a kid who had the right to be sad, to feel weak, to miss his mom without feeling guilty for it. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to do that. Now, every night, I still talk to Mom like I used to. But it's no longer in a whisper, choked with tears. I tell her about Grandpa, about Rachel, about the awful dinner I cooked last night, and how I might go back to study the major she always wanted me to pursue. I don't know if she can hear me, but I like to believe she can. Because for the first time in a long time, I finally feel at peace.